I never imagined something like this could happen to me. It was a cold morning, around 3 a.m., on a deserted road in the interior of Colorado. I was driving home after a long day of driving, and the only company I had were the dim lights on the truck's dashboard and the constant sound of the engine. The road seemed endless, and everything was peaceful until I saw something strange in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just tiredness getting to me, but I soon realized something was wrong. A woman suddenly appeared out of nowhere, walking into the middle of the road. I blinked a few times, almost not believing my eyes. She was covered in blood, as if she had come from a crime scene. Her clothes were soaked, stained, and dirty. My heart almost came out of my mouth, and I slowed down, wondering what was happening. There was no one there. The road was empty and there was no sign of an accident. I stopped, hesitant, and she approached slowly. She said she was a veterinarian and was on her way to remove a road-killed deer up ahead. The story sounded strange, but there was no reason to doubt it, until she asked me for information about a remote location, a village lost in the mountains that I barely knew. The way she looked at me, with a penetrating look that was too calm for the situation, made me uneasy. She seemed disconnected. As if the blood covering her body was nothing more than a normal part of her routine. And that sent a shiver down my spine. I asked her if she was okay, and she responded vaguely, as if I were the last person she wanted to talk to. When she talked about the deer, her voice was so monotone and distant, as if she was memorizing line work. But the strangest thing of all was that, as she got closer, I realized that there was no sound coming from her. No clicking footsteps, nothing. Only the sound of the cold wind cutting through the silence of the deserted road. I began to feel a strange sensation in the air, as if the night had suddenly become thicker. The woman didn't seem to care about the blood that covered her body. She didn't seem to be in a hurry, nor afraid. She stood there, still, almost as if she was waiting for something, but I couldn't understand what. Her gaze was fixed, distant, and when she approached the truck window, something about her smile bothered me deeply. It was an almost forced smile, but there was something about it that didn't fit the situation. Something wrong? She asked me again about the way to the village. The tone of her voice was already starting to bother me. It was as if she was trying to make herself understood, but at the same time, something seemed out of place. I could almost feel the tension building between us, as if the air around her was thicker, heavier. I decided not to give more detailed information. I just said I didn't know where it was and tried to move on. But when I started to shift into gear, she put her hand on my window. It was such a quick reaction that I could barely react. It was at that moment that I saw the blood on her hands up close. It wasn't blood from a simple accident. It was thick, almost as if it had dried, but with a strange color, a dark tone that didn't look like something that had happened recently. The smell then invaded the truck. A strong, acidic smell, almost as if rotting flesh was mixed in the air. I couldn't concentrate on anything anymore. The sight of her, with her bloody hand and her staring gaze, made me tremble inside. She stood there, motionless, waiting for me to say something. I couldn't stop the urge to finally ask what was going on, but the answer I got didn't make any sense. She just looked at me and said, "The deer is already gone. There's nothing left to do." The tone was that of someone who knew more than he should have known. When she let go of my window, the smell disappeared instantly, as if it had never been there. I stood frozen for a few seconds, trying to understand what had just happened. But before I could react, she had already walked away. I started to accelerate the truck without thinking. The desire to get out of there was so great that my fingers could barely hold the right steering wheel. The road felt longer now, like I was running away from something I didn't understand but felt deeply that I shouldn't ignore. As I drove, the sound of the engine seemed muffled, as if the world was silent. The radio, which had previously been working perfectly, now only emitted static. And I couldn't shake the thought that she was watching me, from somewhere in the darkness. It was only after a few kilometers that I realized that the feeling of being watched wasn't going away. I constantly looked in the rearview mirror, hoping to see that macabre face again. But there was nothing. The road was empty, and everything was so silent that it seemed as if even the cars themselves had disappeared from the world. Still, at every turn, at every gap between the trees, I felt like something was following me. I don't know how, but I knew she was still there, somewhere. When I finally arrived in town, feeling relieved, I decided to stop at a gas station to get some air. There, I asked the gas station attendant if he knew of any veterinarians that were on the road. He looked at me with a strange expression, as if I had asked him about something absurd. He said he didn't know any veterinarians working in that area and had never heard of a deer being run over on that road. What he said chilled me inside, because I knew she was telling the truth, but at the same time, I couldn't put the pieces of this story together. Most bizarre of all was the fact that, over the next week, I couldn't find any news of a deer being run over, or any reference to what she had said. I looked in local newspapers, even asked people in town, but no one seemed to know anything. And worse, I started to realize that the blood on her hands wasn't the only strange detail. I could never forget her look, that calm, cold look, as if she was waiting for something. And to this day, whenever I pass that road, I get the feeling that something or someone is watching me, waiting for me. I never imagined that my life would turn upside down like it did that night in East Africa in the 80s. I was making a delivery, transporting cargo for a logistics company, and the road seemed endless, with the desert all around and few cities along the way. Night had fallen quickly, and I was tired, but as always, I tried to keep driving, hoping to reach my destination before dawn. That's when the light from my truck's headlights cut through the darkness, and I saw something strange up ahead. What appeared to be a small roadside village soon turned out to be a trap. I don't remember exactly what happened, but suddenly, a group of men appeared, running towards my truck. They were armed and seemed aggressive, shouting words I didn't understand. I tried to stop the vehicle, but before I could react, they surrounded me. I was pulled out of the truck, pinned down and dragged to the ground. Fear took over me, but the worst was yet to come. Those men thought I was part of a persecuted tribe in the region, something I had never had anything to do with. The confusion was total. I tried to explain that I was just a truck driver, a simple worker, but nothing I said seemed to make sense to them. They didn't listen to me. I only saw hatred in their eyes. I was taken to a kind of makeshift prison, a cramped, dark, stuffy space with other prisoners, all with the same terrified faces. Most were visibly injured, and the smell of fear was unbearable. The tension inside was palpable, and the silence only made the environment more oppressive. I was stuck in a situation I didn't understand, surrounded by people who seemed to know something I didn't. The night passed slowly, but the real nightmare began when I heard screams in the distance. There were screams of agony, mixed with guttural and ritual sounds that seemed to come from a nightmare. As the night progressed, the sound became clearer, closer. What was happening? I didn't know, but something told me that these people were being executed, and I was the next target. Panic took over me. What could I do? Nothing. He was trapped there, unable to do anything to escape. The fear of being the next victim began to gnaw at my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about those screams, which now seemed closer than ever. The air inside the makeshift prison was thick, hot, and I was breaking out in a cold sweat. I looked at the other prisoners, but no one seemed willing to speak. The silence was absolute, as if everyone was waiting for the inevitable. Every sound that came from outside made my heart race, and the fear of being dragged into the darkness of the night increased with each second. I needed to get out of there, anyway. It was then that I saw something that made me feel a ray of hope. One of the prison guards came through a crack in the wall, and I could hear enough to know that they were planning another execution. They spoke in a local language, but I managed to understand a few words. Tomorrow, one more. My stomach turned. If I didn't act soon, it would be one of the +1. I looked around, trying to find a way to escape, but the cell was so poorly constructed that it seemed impossible. But as the night went on and the despair grew, I realized that I couldn't continue to wait passively for something that I didn't know if I had the strength to face. I knew I needed to try something. The silence of the night was broken by a distant noise, and it made me realize that maybe this was my chance. Very carefully, I approached the wall and examined the gaps between the wooden boards. I couldn't waste time. I tried to concentrate, thinking of any way to escape. That's when I heard footsteps, closer. My heart accelerated. They were coming to take me out of the cell. I knew the time to act had arrived. There was no more time to hesitate. With sweaty hands and a shaking body, I slipped into the crack and, for a moment, felt the cold night air invading my nostrils. I was as close to freedom as a man could be, but I also knew that if I was caught, the fate would be even worse than I could imagine. I took a deep breath, waited for the right moment and, with a quick movement, I managed to get outside, still without being noticed. The fear of being seen made me run in silence, hiding in the shadows. But as I looked around, I realized I had no idea where I was going. I just knew I needed to get away. I ran without looking back, without thinking. The darkness of the night seemed to swallow me with every step, and the distant sounds of voices and screams were left behind, but not completely gone. I could feel that they were still looking for me, that every moment more men were coming out of the shadows. Dread gripped me, and I knew that if I got caught, it would be the end. The trees around the road were just black shapes against the sky, and I crept through them, trying not to make any noise. Panting was the only sound I could hear, drowned out by the rapid beating of my heart. I had no idea how long I ran, but the terrain started to change. The vegetation became denser, and the sound of nature around me seemed distorted, as if the world had stopped making sense. I knew I was far from the village now, but what awaited me outside? I was still in unknown territory. But the adrenaline was keeping me going, like a primal instinct. I was surviving, and all I wanted was to find some kind of refuge. I didn't think about anything other than that. That's when finally, after hours of running, I spotted a small village in the distance. My feet were sore, and my mind was beginning to fail, but I saw a light on, as if it were hope. I dragged myself there, tired and almost in a state of delirium. As I got closer, I realized it was a military checkpoint. I didn't know if I was safe, but I had no other options. I told my story, trying to explain everything that had happened. At first, no one seemed to believe me, but after a few checks, I was finally able to prove my identity. I was freed, but what I experienced that night is engraved in my mind in a way that I cannot describe. The executions, the screams, the immense fear I felt, all of this haunts me to this day. I could never understand how I was mistaken for that group, nor why the tribesmen were being hunted like that. What disturbed me most was the fact that no one talked about it. I searched for information, tried to understand what happened, but no one seemed to know. All that remained was the silent nightmare and the feeling that something terrible was still happening in that region, and that, perhaps, no one would really be able to escape. I don't know exactly what happened that night, but I'll try to tell you how it all went. I was driving along a deserted highway in California, on those long, endless roads that seem to get lost in the darkness. I'm a truck driver, so I've seen a lot in my time on the road, but nothing like what happened that night. It was almost 3 in the morning, the night was cold, and I was starting to get sleepy. I looked to the side and saw that endless road, without any lights, just the lights of my truck cutting through the darkness. That's when I saw her. In the middle of the road, far away, almost at the edge of the road, a woman. She was standing still, wearing a long coat. She seemed to be waiting for someone. I passed quickly, but her image stayed in my head, as if she had materialized there out of nowhere. There was no house nearby, and I was completely alone. It's not normal to see someone there, especially on a road like that, much less alone in the middle of the night. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to ignore it. Probably a person who lost their direction, I thought. But then, something made me go back. I don't know how to explain what, perhaps a strange sensation, as if I were being watched. The road was completely empty, just me and the woman there. When I got closer, I saw better. She was so still, almost rigid, as if she had been standing there for hours. Her face was toward the ground, and the only thing that moved was the wind, blowing the corners of her coat. It didn't look normal, her posture was wrong. Something didn't make sense. I'd seen people hitchhiking before, but this woman looked different, like she didn't belong there. I decided to stop. That was a mistake. When the truck stopped, the silence was almost palpable. The kind of silence that makes the sound of my own breathing seem too loud. She didn't move. He didn't speak. Didn't do anything. He just remained there, standing, with his eyes fixed on the ground. The road was deserted, the only light was from my truck's headlights, illuminating that strange figure, with that almost rigid posture. I couldn't see her face, but I had a strange feeling that she knew exactly where I was. Something in the air felt off. I was already starting to feel a deep discomfort. Something told me to leave, but for some reason, I was still there, staring at that figure. The woman didn't lift her head, didn't make any movement. I waited for her to say something, anything, but she remained motionless. The wind was stronger now, and the trees in the distance were swaying, but even the wind seemed to go away when it passed near her, as if her presence had sucked away all the energy around her. I had my foot on the brake, the door was still open, but I couldn't get out of there. Something paralyzed me. That's when she finally moved. But it wasn't like a normal person. Her movement was abrupt, as if she were a puppet being pulled suddenly. The woman slowly raised her head, and I saw her face. I have no words to describe what I saw. His face was pale, almost gray, as if he were dead. His eyes were completely white, no irises, no pupils. It was as if she weren't real, as if she were made of something that shouldn't exist. I trembled, but something inside me made me stay there, still watching. She didn't say anything. He just looked at me. And in that look, I felt pressure, like I was being crushed, like she was trying to pull me into her with her gaze. I couldn't breathe properly, my throat felt tight, and my body felt like it was in slow motion. I don't know how, but my hand automatically went to the steering wheel, and I tried to start the truck. But the engine wouldn't start. I only heard the sound of my heart beating hard and that silence that filled everything. It was as if the woman was controlling time, making everything work at her pace, and I was completely at her mercy. When I finally managed to start the engine, the sound of the truck seemed to make her move. She took a step forward, but it wasn't like a normal person. It was as if she were floating, gliding along the road. The headlights illuminated it again, and that's when I realized there were no shadows. It wasn't as if the light was casting shadows on her body, it was as if the woman was absorbing everything. All the light, all the energy, everything I saw and heard seemed to be swallowed by it. I didn't know what to do. What I was seeing didn't make sense, and the feeling that I was dealing with something far beyond human understanding only increased. That's when I felt it. The vibration. It wasn't the engine, nor the road. It was as if the ground was pulsing beneath my truck, and the woman, with that gaze fixed on me, was provoking it. My body started to shake, and I knew without a shadow of a doubt that it wasn't just fear. Something there was on another level. Something that couldn't be explained, something that was trying to absorb me, consume me. The road seemed to stretch on forever, and that figure was watching me, as if waiting for me to do something, something that I knew if I did, would change everything forever. I stepped on the gas. The truck sped forward, but the woman did not move. She just stood there, standing still, watching as I sped by. When I looked in the rearview mirror, she was still there. She didn't move, but even so, I felt like her eyes were following me. The feeling of being watched continued for a long time, even when the road began to disappear and darkness took over the path again. I was terrified, not knowing if it had been real or if my mind had simply broken in the face of fear. I tried to convince myself that I was seeing things. That it was just tiredness, or maybe the stress of a long journey. But the feeling that something was wrong did not leave me. That look, that silence, that wasn't natural. Over the next few days, I tried to get back to normal, but whenever I drove alone, I felt an increasing discomfort. As if something was watching me all the time. Like I never really left that road behind. To this day, I don't know what happened that night. The woman didn't look human, but she wasn't a simple hallucination either. I know what I saw, and I know that for some reason it's still there. Sometimes, when I pass along lonely roads, I feel a presence, a weight in the air, as if it is watching me, waiting for something. I will not go back to that road, and I will never forget what happened that night. And no matter how much I try to forget, the fear still remains, deep inside, where I can't reach. I had been traveling for hours, and sleep was starting to hit me hard. It was 1 a.m, and the road was deserted, just me and the headlights of my rear-view mirrors illuminating the darkness. The cemetery was something that appeared out of nowhere, on the side of the road, with its dark and old tombstones, without a living soul nearby. I was about to collapse, so I decided to park right there, rest a little and continue my journey later. The place seemed peaceful, but there was still something strange about that cemetery. The feeling of emptiness, you know? As if something was just waiting, as if the place was waiting for someone. I got comfortable in the cabin and turned off the engine. The silence was deafening. That kind of silence that seems to swallow everything around. I closed my eyes and tried to relax, but I couldn't. The cemetery, with its dark shadows and the cold wind whipping through the trees, was bothering me more than I wanted to admit. I looked out the window, but saw nothing but graves and trees. After a few minutes, I let my head rest on the bench and ended up falling asleep. That's when I woke up. But I didn't really wake up. It was a strange sensation, as if my body was paralyzed but my mind was still conscious. I couldn't move, and my breathing was heavy. The air in the cabin felt thicker, and the first thing I noticed was that I was no longer alone. There was something, or someone, inside the cabin with me. I didn't see anything, but I could feel a presence there, something dense and strange, as if it was watching me, waiting. My head was completely filled with dread, and all I could think was that something was wrong, very wrong. I tried to scream, I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. Sleep paralysis, I knew what it was, but I had never felt it so palpably. I could hear the sound of my own breathing, which seemed louder than it should be. I tried to breathe in, but the feeling of being watched intensified. I couldn't see anything, but I felt like I was being watched by something, something that wasn't human, something that was there, waiting to get me. Every second seemed to last an eternity, and the feeling of being surrounded by something invisible but incredibly close was driving me crazy. I didn't know what to think anymore. I tried to strain my muscles, but I couldn't. I felt a growing pressure in my chest, as if someone was crushing me from inside the cabin, but there was nothing there. The worst part was that the fear seemed to have no end. The feeling that something was there, standing in the dark, just watching me, grew with every second. I was completely paralyzed, and worst of all, the feeling that what was there was not human. It was as if the place, the cemetery, had something to do with it. As if death itself had descended there with me, waiting for me to give in to fear, for me to surrender to what was around me. I wanted to scream, but my mouth wouldn't move. I tried to open my eyes again, but I no longer knew if I was really awake. What made me sure that I was experiencing something more than a simple hallucination was the smell. I don't know how to explain it properly, but the smell was like wet earth, something like the smell of the grave, a dense, heavy smell. I closed my eyes again, but it didn't help. That thing, that didn't want me to do anything. He didn't want me to see, he didn't want me to leave there. And I knew it, somehow, I felt it with all my soul. The feeling that something was moving inside the cabin made me even more desperate. I started to feel something touching my shoulder. It wasn't a physical touch, it wasn't like someone was actually touching me, but a feeling of pressure. The presence was there, and I knew it was getting closer. I felt like it was a shadow taking over my soul, spreading across the cabin. I tried everything, I tried to move, I tried to scream, but nothing. Just the growing weight on my mind. I wanted to run away, but I was trapped in that nightmare, immobilized, with that thing getting closer and closer. It was then that, suddenly, I felt a cold, icy feeling on my neck. As if an icy hand had touched my skin, but again, there was nothing there. There was no one. I knew I was being touched, but I couldn't see it. I tried to resist, I tried to fight the paralysis, but all I could do was feel that presence invading every part of my being. I knew, somehow, that cemetery, that place, had something to do with this. It was cursed, I could feel it. And I was trapped there, trapped in that cabin, with fear consuming me and that presence getting closer and closer. I didn't know what was happening, but something in me felt like the presence was starting to move away, as if it had done what it wanted and was now withdrawing. Little by little, the pressure in my chest began to ease, and the feeling of being watched dissipated, but not completely. I was still paralyzed, still felt a strange weight, as if the cabin was filled with something invisible. The coldness on my neck remained, but in a more subtle way, like a reminder of what had happened, something I couldn't get rid of. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I was able to move my fingers. Little by little, I gained control of my body. The first thing I did was start the truck's engine, even though I felt like something was still there, watching me. But when the engine roared, the feeling seemed to go away, and I was finally able to breathe. The cabin was empty. There was nothing. But I knew what I had felt. I knew what happened. And I also knew that it wasn't just a hallucination. I hadn't just dreamed that. When I started the car and sped away from that cemetery, the feeling of relief was overwhelming, but at the same time, I knew that the feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. I was looking in the rearview mirror as I drove away, and for a second I thought I saw a shadow in the truck's window, but when I looked again, there was nothing. I didn't know if I was going crazy, but somehow, I knew that what happened wasn't just a passing sensation. I was running away from something I didn't understand, something I didn't want to leave behind. I never parked near a cemetery again. I never stopped on a deserted road at night again without feeling fear take over me. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I feel the weight of that presence. And to this day, I can't understand what happened that night. I don't know if it was an illusion, a nightmare, or something else. But I know that, somehow, the cemetery had something to do with it. And, even now, the feeling that I'm still being watched, that something is still out there, accompanies me with every kilometer I travel. I've been working as a truck driver for years, but nothing prepared me for what I found in that city. It was supposed to be another routine delivery. The company sent me to a place I had never heard of, a small town in the countryside, isolated, with streets that seemed to have been forgotten by time. They gave me strange instructions, something about following strict protocol upon arrival, but I just thought it was another one of those over-the-top safety rules. When I entered that city, something in the air gave me a chill. It wasn't just abandonment, but the feeling that there was something wrong, something heavy hanging over everything. The city seemed deserted. The houses were all in ruins, with broken windows and open doors, but there wasn't a living soul around. The sun was setting when I arrived, and the golden afternoon light made the building seem even more gloomy and forgotten. I parked the truck near the abandoned store where the delivery was supposed to be made, and there were the instructions that my company had given me. Sleep immediately after delivery, avoid any distractions and do not wake up before dawn. If you do, the consequences will be fatal. I laughed, thinking it was just a bad joke. It didn't occur to me that something really serious could happen. I made the delivery quickly, and, as instructed, I prepared to rest in the truck. But something wouldn't let me relax. The city was completely silent, and night came faster than I expected. There was not a single sound, no animals, no wind, no movement. I tried to close my eyes, but an uneasy feeling was growing inside me. I felt like I was being watched, but there was no one around. I looked out the window, but only saw darkness. Fear began to tighten in my chest. Something told me that the city, that place, wasn't just deserted by chance. Minutes later, I heard a sound. Something strange, like dragging on the ground, coming from the street. I tensed, but didn't move. The sound soon stopped, but my body was on alert. I couldn't ignore the company's rules. I was instructed not to get out of the truck, not to wake up before dawn, and I knew I had to follow that. Even with the fear growing, something inside me told me that disobeying this rule would be a deadly mistake. But as the night wore on, I felt it getting harder to control my breathing. The feeling that there was something lurking intensified. The feeling of discomfort increased. The silence was so heavy that I could hear every beat of my heart, and my every movement seemed deafening. Those instructions, those absurd rules about not waking up before dawn. I was already starting to doubt my sanity. I began to wonder what could be so serious that the company would give such an extreme warning. Time seemed to pass more slowly than usual, and the tension in the air was almost palpable. I knew I had to sleep, but the fear of something strange happening kept me from closing my eyes. And that's when I saw him. A shadow. Outside, near the ruined houses, something moved slowly among the shadows. I stood still, unblinking, trying to understand what I was seeing. It wasn't a person, not exactly. It was a tall, hunched figure, with slow, almost shapeless movements, as if it wasn't completely there, as if it were blending in with the surrounding darkness. I looked at the truck's clock. Dawn was right in the middle, and I knew I couldn't leave, that I couldn't do anything. But panic was consuming me. Every movement of the shadow seemed to drag me into a state of paralysis. My mind was screaming to follow the rules, to stay there and not look at the window anymore, but instinct was pushing me away. The fear wasn't just in what I saw, but in what I didn't see. The feeling of being watched, watching my every breath, only grew. I knew that the silence wasn't natural, that that city wasn't really empty. Something, someone, was there. But the worst part was when the sound started to get closer. The scraping on the ground became louder, clearer, and now it was coming straight from the other side of the street. It was as if someone was crawling along the sidewalk, but there was no sound of footsteps. It was something heavier, more dragging. The kind of sound that makes your skin crawl. And then, without warning, something hit the side of the truck, a thud so loud it shook the windows. I froze. Fear paralyzed me. I looked outside and saw nothing. Just the shadows, darker than normal. My mind was in a whirl, trying to understand what was happening, trying to remember the damn instructions. Do not wake up before dawn. I knew that disobeying this rule would have a price, but what I was experiencing now felt like more than just giving in. It felt like a trap, something I shouldn't have accepted. Every second inside was a fight against panic. The feeling that something was about to enter the truck, that I was no longer alone, consumed me more and more. I didn't know what to do. The shadows continued to move outside, always present, but without form, without explanation. I knew I shouldn't look, that I should ignore the noises and try to sleep, but every moment the tension became unbearable. The silence was slowly breaking, and I felt that, at any moment, something could invade the cabin. Then, on impulse, I looked in the rearview mirror. And that's when I saw it. Not a figure, not a shadow, but something like a distortion, a ripple in the air, as if space itself were being altered. Something was approaching, but it wasn't something physical, it was, as if time itself was distorting, pulling everything towards something that shouldn't be there. I tried to get up, but my body wouldn't respond. I was completely paralyzed, not just by fear, but by an invisible force that seemed to keep me trapped there. There were no more doubts. The city, that place, was somehow alive. And it wasn't a life I knew. I was about to be swallowed by something I didn't understand, but I knew I couldn't help it. The sounds of dragging grew closer, and the feeling that something was dragging itself down the street, crawling toward my truck, made me feel like I was being surrounded by something formless, something that didn't follow the laws of the world I lived in. The night seemed to have no end. The clock was telling the time, but I was beginning to doubt the time. I didn't know if I was awake or if I had fallen into some kind of nightmare. Fear made me dizzy, made me believe that I was no longer in control of the situation. I just wanted the dawn to come. I wanted to get out of there, run away to somewhere else, but I knew the rules were clear: don't wake up before dawn. Whatever was out there expected me to break the rules. He expected me to try to leave. I didn't know what would happen if I did, but dread told me nothing good would come of it. When finally, the sun began to rise, the dim morning light brought me a sense of relief. The dragging on the ground disappeared, the shadows dissipated, and I was finally able to move. The fear was still there, but now, with the dawn, everything seemed more distant, as if the city was just an empty place again. I started the truck and accelerated, without looking back. The sun was rising, and the deserted streets began to look as if nothing unusual had happened. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I knew that, no matter how much I had followed the rules, the city and its shadows had marked me. Something there followed me, and to this day, I can't forget that feeling of being watched, that maybe, just maybe, I was another victim of the ghost town.